Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to Money Talks. I am Guy Drinkel, doing the ultimate layman job in this one, but I am of course joined by Mo. How are you doing, Mo? Welcome to your own show.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, very, very good. Been a lovely day here in my part of the world in England, and yeah, just a shame I've been stuck indoors all day in between working and whatnot. But there we go. That's life living in the UK.
And we've
Getting
dragged
stuck
you home
indoors
to
when the
talk
weather's
about FFP. What have we done?
Oh yeah. What a way to end the day.
Absolutely. Who doesn't love anything more than FFP? But that is why we're here, listener. We are to talk about the changes. But as Mo has gracefully listed out some questions for me, let's get into this, shall we? So we obviously the news broke yesterday, Mo, about financial fair play being changed and replaced with the new rules in 2023. Do you want to explain what the changes are?
Yeah, sure. So, FFP, financial fair play, is something that we've covered in an immense amount of detail here on Money Talks. And the long and short of the existing rules are that clubs should look to essentially work to a sustainable financial model where losses are minimized to over a 3-year, what they call reporting period, 30 million euros. So effectively 10 million a year. Now, this is a model that, in theory, when it launched a good 8 or 9 years ago, was something that felt like a welcome addition to not only the Premier League, but the top leagues. We saw some pretty bad cases of clubs being taken over by irresponsible people and running the clubs almost. Portsmouth, for example, they suffered from a catalogue of poor owners coming in one after another and really making a complete mess of clubs like that. But the rules were also intended to achieve some level of parity, even at the upper echelons of European football too. So what we saw was rules brought in to ensure that clubs like Manchester City and Chelsea, that prior to the rules coming in, were regularly racking up losses of 60, 80, 100 million plus per year, would be curtailed, because clearly that was giving those types of clubs an unfair advantage over a Liverpool, an Arsenal, a Tottenham Hotspur, even a Manchester United that did try to live within their means. So these rules, as we know, ultimately have not been as successful as perhaps the owners and the clubs of the non-nation states that own and operate football clubs would have liked. And we've seen that through the abject failure of these rules in being able to stop a club like Manchester City or a PSG from essentially using whatever means necessary to bring in the best players, and by bringing the best players, winning trophies, winning silverware, achieving success that would simply not be possible by running a sustainable model free of what I call and others call financial doping. So the rules as we have known them are about to be phased out. And this is something that Tariq Pandra of the New York Times broke as a story about 24 hours ago as we record this. And the rules as they are proposed, which would come into effect, as you noted, from 2023, would include amongst them a key change being that clubs should no longer spend in excess of 70% of their revenue on wages and also transfer fees or amortization, as well as agent fees. The reason I said transfer fees or amortization is because, based on the reports, there's perhaps a little bit of lack of clarity about whether it's one or the other. And the reason I say one or the other is because transfer fee spend is not the same thing as amortization. So just very, very quickly, well, explain for listeners who aren't aware of the difference. When, for example, a club signs a player for £30 million on a 5-year contract, in accounting terms, that has to be written down over a 5-year period, the duration of the contract. So in year one, that is captured as £30 million. In year two, that is captured as £24 million. And that asset is then depreciated over the term of the contract. So that is what amortization is. It's reducing the value in equal amounts over the duration of the contract. However, that £30 million in reality may have involved, in the first initial payment, perhaps £5 million being put down, in the second payment, £10 million being put down, and in the third payment, £15 million. So over a 3-year period, the full transfer fee is paid, but in accounting terms, amortization shows it as £6 million a year during the duration of the 5-year contract. But in real terms, in cash terms, it is paid over 3 years. So we just need to find out if there is leaning towards the actual cash movement or the accounting treatment. But the wage bill is the wage bill, and that's a pretty straightforward one to understand, as is agents' fees. So Liverpool, over the last 4 or 5 years, have spent very, very high amounts of money on agents. And, this again is something that I've covered as a topic here on Money Talks. It is something that I think the club can potentially rein back on. And certainly with this rule change, if and when it comes in, there will certainly need to be more of a focus on ensuring that spend is reined in. And the reason I say that is because, for example, Liverpool Football Club in the 2019-20 reporting period for the Football Association, when it comes to spend on agents, which runs from the 1st of February 2019 through to the 31st of January 2020, spent £30 million. Now you think, okay, well that's quite a lot of money, but surely we had lots of things going on. Well, no, we didn't. We spent hardly any money in the summer transfer window. So if you think back to summer 2019, the marquee signing for that summer was Sepp Vandenberg. Yes, we brought in Harvey Elliott. Yes, we brought in Adrian. But at that time, they didn't come in for any fees. The Elliott fee was only agreed a couple of years later with Fulham through an arbitration. Adrian came in on a free. He was just practicing with a second-tier team in Spain from memory before we brought him in once Simon Mignolet moved on from Liverpool. And then in the January 2020 transfer window, we spent a whopping £7 million on Takumi Minamino. And during that same period, the contracts that we renewed were very few and far between. Divock Origi was one, Joel Matip was another. So when you look at the actual transactions that took place during that 12-month period that would have involved agents, there was actually very little that went on. Yet despite that, we spent £30 million on agents for just those deals. There were a raft of academy players who were signed or whose contracts were extended, but those fees normally would be very, very paltry, relatively speaking, compared to the deals for first team players. So what that indicated is that Liverpool do spend excessively on agents, and that is something that the club will need to rein back in on. But that is one of the key developments where this is concerned, that the focus is now on this 70% rule based on wages, based on potentially transfer fees and agents. So if Liverpool Football Club were to generate £600 million when this rule comes in, then that means that they would be essentially capped at £420 million to spend on wages, on agents' fees, and on transfer fee instalments. So even if you might hear that the club has signed X player for £50 million, it doesn't mean that the club has literally gone and spent £50 million in one fell swoop and paid that towards the selling club. In typical circumstances, that is spread out over 3 instalments. So that is what the club will have to operate to, and that is potentially a challenge because Liverpool Football Club's wage bill prior to COVID coming along was floating at around the 58% mark. Now, if you then add on top of that spend on agents as well as spend on transfer fees, then the club does exceed that 70% mark. So what it will in real terms do is put a focus on the club having to rein in its spend on wages and also agents' fees, as I discussed, as well as limiting potentially the amount that can be spent in the transfer windows. So that will be somewhat of a challenge where Liverpool is concerned, based on how they've operated over the last couple of years. Now, in terms of other rule changes, there is talk that if clubs fall foul of these rules, depending on how to what extent they transgress these rules, there is potential demotion from the Champions League. So that is something that obviously has been in place even under the current rules, and we have seen the odd few club prohibited from participating in the Champions League. UEFA tried twice to do that where Man City was concerned, but on both occasions they were unsuccessful for different reasons. So again, I wouldn't put too much weight on that as a rule change. And one of the other kind of key things to note where rule changes are concerned about moving to this new form of model is that the clubs that participate, in European competitions, would have their accounts scrutinized in real time. So what that means is that unlike the current model, which looks at the last set of published accounts, so in the case of Liverpool, their published accounts relate to the 2021 season, which ended 10 months ago now. Instead, UEFA would have access to all clubs' financial records in real time, and would be able to see in real time what their spend is on transfer fees, on wages, on agents, and they can then make those decisions based on the present season rather than on the previous season. So again, that I think is a good move, and that is something that I applaud. But it is something that again, will potentially be subject to creative accounting, if you want to call it that, where certain clubs are concerned. And the last point I wanted to make with all of this is that, again, UEFA potentially, as part of introducing these changes to FFP, are talking about assessing fair market value for sponsorships. Now, this is something I think that they will really struggle with. Now, we've talked a lot about Manchester City sponsorship deals, and it is something that I will be talking about in my next Money Talks, which I'll come on to later on. And these sponsorship deals, there's been a lot of scrutiny about these. There've been leaks that have been published by Der Spiegel in Germany and other news sources, And yet, despite the leaks, despite the evidence coming to the attention of the public, nothing has really happened. And it shows that UEFA, for whatever reason, doesn't have a great track record when it comes to head-on tackling the most egregious breaches of these types of rules, and especially when it comes to sponsorship deals, where, for example, a sponsorship deal might be worth £70 million to a club, but the actual sponsor is only putting in £5 or £10 million, with the rest made up by in cash injections from the owner, who happens to also be closely linked to or in some way affiliated with that sponsor. So there are things like that which I think, in all real terms, not going to change one iota under these new rules. So that, I think, again, is something that is disappointing. But we'll see if UEFA does try and take a harder stance with clubs. Now, the only other thing to note with all of this is that one of the main architects behind these rule changes happens to be the chairman of Paris Saint-Germain, Nasser Al-Khelaifi. Now, that is just quite balmy that the club that is perhaps most responsible for allegedly financially doping in European football, that their key member of staff when it comes to the operations of that club has had such a huge role in designing a new set of rules, which just so coincidentally benefit his club more than any other club in Europe. But that might just be a complete and utter coincidence.
Happens all the time. Oh dear. Well, more. I'm sure people up to this stage basically want to look at it from a Liverpool selfish point of view, but I can imagine what your answer is going to be. But is this good or bad for Liverpool?
Well, it's certainly not good. I think that it is something that is disappointing where Liverpool Football Club is concerned. As we all know, Liverpool Football Club does try to run a sustainable model, and it's about the owners not putting their own money into the club. It's about the club generating its own funds in order to finance its affairs. Whether it's to do with paying the wage bill, whether it's to do with bringing in new signings, even to do with infrastructure. So yes, FSG a number of years ago sourced a loan for the expansion of the main stand, but it was not their own money. They brought in a loan. They then loaned that loan from them to Liverpool Football Club at no interest, but it wasn't their money. So that is something that they very firm and strict and stringent on in terms of their business principles, and that is something that even a pandemic would not veer them away from. So that is something that we all know. This rule change essentially, or these sets of rule changes, will make it easier for clubs that are owned by nation states, essentially. And it is overall a concerning development, one that not only will concern Liverpool, but also other clubs that do try and operate in a sustainable way financially. Your Arsenals, and don't laugh, but Real Madrid, not PSG, Barcelona, Juventus. Now these clubs, I mean, when it comes to financial management, are pretty poor. They're not very good at managing their finances, and Barcelona, we saw the clearest example of that by the fact that they lost Lionel Messi because they were in a complete and utter financial mess of their own doing. However, these are clubs that all try to generate money and spend it make spending decisions based on the money that they generate. They don't have rich benefactors that almost have a blank checkbook and a limitless, bottomless pot of cash into which they can dip into year on year to finance the affairs of these clubs. Whereas some of our rivals, domestically and abroad, it is a different situation for them. So this news is something that is not a surprise. When we saw the defeat of UEFA in the Court of Arbitration for Sport back in 2020, and we heard some initial rumours about the FFP rules being replaced last year, we knew that this was coming, and I believe that there is a vote scheduled for 2 months' time in May amongst UEFA to potentially replace the existing rules with these new set of rules. And I think it is a formality that these rule changes will be implemented from 23-24 onwards. So that ultimately is a disadvantage to Liverpool. There's simply no other way of looking at it.
Great. Get the success whilst you can, Liverpool. Yeah, you've kind of already mentioned the ones that'll profit from this. Is Man City, PSG, and now Newcastle. I mean, how steep is the change? How harsh is it going to be in terms of helping them? I've worded that poorly, but how much of a help is this going to be for them?
Very big. What they all know as clubs is that they put the fear factor into the corridors of UEFA. Yes, UEFA have tried to deal with certainly Man City, but PSG, their alleged financial doping is on an even bigger scale than that of Manchester City, and the reason for that is that their TV money at PSG is substantially less than it is for Manchester City. So that their sponsorship deals are even more significant factor in their overall revenues than they are for Manchester City. Now, it is no coincidence whatsoever that over the last couple of months, we've seen Manchester City announce sponsorship deals with 3-4 different companies that just so happen to be based in the same region as their owners. They knew what was coming. They knew that FFP in its current guise was coming to an end, and they knew that they had to gear up for the very large and imposing threat posed by Newcastle United's ownership group, which includes the investment fund from Saudi Arabia. Because as rich as the Abu Dhabi owners are, they are extremely rich. Their wealth pales into comparison against that of the investment fund of Saudi Arabia. And for all intents and purposes, it is, the ruling elite of Saudi Arabia that are in charge and are pulling the strings when Newcastle United are now concerned. So it is a massive boon to those types of clubs. And I think what you will see over the next few months is further sponsorship deals announced by Manchester City, by PSG, by Newcastle United, or by companies that again have coincidentally very close ties to or links with the nations from which their owners emanate. So this is concerning to the extreme, but unfortunately, UEFA does have a case where one of the three clubs that I've just listed has been infiltrated at the very highest level by Al Khalifi, and it is very, very clear and abundant that he has influenced these rule changes for the benefit of his club, and then alongside that, certainly where he will be concerned, unfortunately, Manchester City and potentially Newcastle United will benefit as well.
Yeah, so if you're from Boston and you like John Henry, give us some money. Oh dear. But obviously these rules are from UEFA more, and we know the Premier League could bring in their own FFP's dead, but their own set of rules. How would that work side by side, or would it work side by side? What's your thoughts if the Premier League stricts up their rules?
Okay, so for all intents and purposes, the Premier League essentially work to the same rules as the UEFA financial fair play rules. However, it doesn't mean that they have to stick and abide by them alone. So what we see, for example, is other leagues operate their own set of rules that sit alongside UEFA's financial fair play rules at this moment in time. And then whatever the rules are known as, once they change, there's no reason why the Premier League can't introduce rules that bolster and strengthen the focus on financial sustainability rather than simply going along with those rules as they are. So just two quick examples. We have the EFL, English Football League, have a very stringent set of rules around financial fair play, and they sit over and above the rules in place operated by UEFA. And then on top of that, there are also some rules around wage caps, which are operated by La Liga. And it's those rules that led to the case that I mentioned earlier on, which involved Lionel Messi having to be let go essentially by Barcelona because even if they retain him for a nominal amount in terms of wages, they would have exceeded their wage cap, and that is what led to him ultimately ending up at PSG. So there's nothing to stop the Premier League from introducing their own rules, and I certainly think that that is something that Premier League board and the chief executive Richard Masters should now seriously consider.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I mean, we've kind of been screaming out for it, but it's been a figment of imagination for a while now. But obviously, as you said earlier, this doesn't really benefit Liverpool and many other European elite clubs. What can Liverpool and other teams do to fight this, or want changes to this? What can these clubs do?
Okay, I mean, so there are several things, not that any of them will be successful necessarily. So the first is to group together and lobby UEFA in advance of this vote in May, and to argue that, look, as faulty as the rules currently are, they are still certainly better than the rules that are being proposed to be brought in to replace them. Because these rules that will replace them will clearly benefit clubs who are alleged to financially dope and inflate their sponsorship deals. So that is one option, and it's certainly something that I wouldn't be surprised is already happening. But the leading clubs, your Real Madrid, your Liverpools, your Manchester Uniteds of this world, they have already done some of that over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 years, out of concern for the threat posed by your PSGs and Manchester Cities and the way that they operate. And yet, clearly, their efforts have not paid dividends. These clubs have been able to pretty much run away with their domestic leagues and spend almost with impunity. So this is something that I think that would need some upping of the ante, but I'm not sure if all of these other clubs collectively are organised enough to manage in exactly in terms of how that would manifest itself. Again, I'm not sure how that could work, but clearly lobbying UEFA is one option. Another option might be a bit more extreme, and that might be to make threats to domestic leagues and UEFA to say, look, if these rules are clearly going to benefit certain clubs, and if those are the rules that are being brought in, that these other clubs will refuse to participate. So ultimately giving an ultimatum to UEFA to say, and even the Premier League, if Liverpool, Manchester United, and others said, look, if you support or implement these rules, then we will refuse to participate in these competitions And if that happens, for all intents and purposes, the competitions cannot operate. And, that is a big threat that exists, and it could conceivably happen. Chances of it happening, I think, are remote, just simply because your Liverpools, your Manchester Uniteds, and the like would financially suffer significantly if competitions simply couldn't go ahead because they refused to participate. So that is an option, but I think it's highly unlikely. And perhaps another option with all of this is the fact that they could look to explore legal options where legislation might exist, which again could possibly prohibit these types of rule changes. They could even go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport if they pull together to argue that the changes are being influenced by a party, namely PSG, and that have a vested interest in the changes going ahead. And whether that would be successful or not, who knows? But I'd be surprised if some of these other clubs just simply take this line. Now, we may not hear much about it in the media, but I think behind the scenes, the more established clubs who do try and operate in a more sustainable way will be absolutely livid and will certainly be trying whatever they can to at least block these rules from coming in.
Doesn't sound fun. Does not sound fun that more. So it's going to be a weird time for football. When are these rules getting decided? What was the date for the meeting, did you say?
So it's likely to be May.
May, okay.
So there's a couple of months between. Well, depends which part of May, but I mean, as little as about 5 weeks through till a couple of months before these rule changes are voted on.
Beautiful stuff. So football's going to be ruined in May. But you'll obviously be going more detailed in your next show. Do you want to explain to the listeners who you've got on and what you'll be discussing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll be delving into this in a lot more detail with Nick Harris of the Daily Mail on Sunday. Nick is somebody that has covered FFP since pretty much the start of the rules coming into effect, and even before then, in terms of when they were conceived and their planned implementation, inception, etc. So Nick knows about this subject very, very well as anyone out there. So really glad to have him back on Money Talks, and we'll certainly be making a deep dive into what all of this means. And I'm really looking forward to discussing that, as well as a couple of other subjects as well. We obviously are seeing rapid developments almost on a daily basis where the ownership of Chelsea Football Club is concerned. So really quite keen to discuss that with him. And just this past week, we've seen Deloitte's Football Money League published, which ranked Manchester City at the top of European football when it comes to revenue. So for the 2021 season, which was the last completed season, Manchester City's revenues exceeded every other club in Europe, which is something that nobody could have imagined maybe 12, 13, 14 years ago. But here we are. So again, I'll be mulling that one over and having some interesting discussion about exactly how Manchester City have managed such a feat. So yeah, it should be an entertaining and informative discussion with the wonderful Nick Harris.
Hey, Nick can talk back. I just pop in every few minutes to make stupid jokes. Well, that's my role in AI, people. But that is it. So, well, thank you, Mo, for me hosting you. Is that how this works? That's what we'll go with. But thank you for inviting me on your show to ask you questions that you wrote. But that's it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Mo is planned to be back on Sunday, as we say, which is Mother's Day. I don't know why I brought up Mother's Day, but that's it. So Mo will be back probably Sunday or Monday when the pod's released for a more in-depth discussion. But thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at AnfieldIndex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Anfield Index and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.